So first of all, Mark, your reaction to the disqualification of both McLarens and how much of a shock that was to a person with your background.
A huge shock, really. It's something that is always at the forefront of your mind when you're running the cars at a weekend, because it is a big deal. And there are lots of discussions normally between the engineers on the cars, certainly on each car, about how far you think you can push the ride height, because the lower the car is, the more performance you should get. So it's always tempting to try and push it further and further, but you also are aware of the risk of being thrown out if you wear the skids too much, which is the same as being underweight. You just can't do that. So I was very surprised that it happened. Although if you look at the weekend that we had, where there was a multitude of red flags in P2, which prevented teams from doing a much heavy fuel running, and then the wet sessions on Saturday or Friday, I guess it was Friday night there, there would have been significantly less information available for the teams to use to get those ride heights perfectly. So then you just have to assume that not enough additional margin was allowed to account for the fact that there just wasn't enough statistical information available to set them as accurately as you might normally be able to.
With enough margin, yeah. But it's unusual, is it not, to have both cars out for the same reason like that? I mean, I'm thinking Spa last year, George disqualified, Lewis inheriting the win. It's for both of them to be out for the same thing. Obviously, it shows how closely they're running those two cars within the McLaren garage is one thing, but it's also quite unusual, isn't it?
Yes, it is unusual. I mean, it's fairly unusual for the cars to be disqualified at all for this reason, but on the occasions we have, as you say, it's been one car, and in those cases it may well have been that one driver was taking a subtly different line to another one over some bumps, or using a curb more aggressively than another driver, or just that the two teams targeted different ride heights on the two sides of the garage. The fact that it's the rear in this case, I can't, to be fair, I can't remember which skids it was on the other cars that got them disqualified. It used to be obviously the front skids that used to be the problem area, but in this case it's the rear. And I suppose on this circuit with relatively few curbs, it's the rear from bouncing down the long straights and through the very high speed corners that's going to cause that. So if the two cars are set to very similar rear ride heights, then yes, it is like, and they have the same mechanical stiffness in heave and the same aero setup in terms of downforce, then I guess you come to the same result in the end.
I suppose I'm guilty, maybe with others, of thinking that Formula One got through the whole porpoising problem because it was the big catchword a couple of years ago when the new regs came in. But this year there hasn't been that much talk about it. Is this the first time we've seen serious porpoising, or has it been there in the background, do you think, most of the year, but not really been an issue?
I think it's been evident to a certain extent. Nothing like we had when the rules were introduced in 22, the cars first ran, and the teams have worked a lot to improve the cars, both in terms of the way you run the cars mechanically, in terms of the structure of the cars, so the floors being much stiffer, and in terms of the way they've optimized the aero to reduce the problem. But you still see from the onboards, occasionally you'll see the driver's head bobbing up and down as the car is obviously bouncing down the straight. I would say that we've probably seen maybe a bit more from the McLaren. I've a couple of times this year I've noticed, the McLaren does seem to be bouncing a little bit. But the interesting thing is how certainly I remember drivers saying that the cars got worse during races for whatever reason. I must admit, we didn't, from my understanding, I can't remember exactly coming to a conclusion as to why they may have got worse during the race, but it was an occasional comment. And I think we've heard Max a couple of times this year say that, or at least once say that the ride of his car deteriorated through a race, which might have been a similar thing. But it's unusual. But personally, I just think it comes down to that, lack of running that was done. And I'm guessing that they've used the same mechanism they usually use, but with less data, and therefore got a less accurate result out of it.
Yeah, I mean, of all teams which didn't really need to shave the margin, it was McLaren, because they've got a good car and they've got a good points lead everywhere, and you'd think they'd be leaving more margin than most teams. But
yeah,
sorry, yeah.
Well, I would agree, but for all teams, it's an issue, and I would have thought all teams would have looked at the circumstances and adjusted to be on the safe side compared to normal, because of the lack of information. And maybe McLaren did, but they've been caught out by some additional unexpected set of circumstances. It's difficult to say, obviously.
What did you make of the last 10 laps, 8 laps of the race, with Lando suddenly going much slower, backing off around the lap in various places, including the approach to turn 13, effectively in the middle of the straight, a flat out kink?
Yeah.
Was that McLaren in reality knowing what was going on with the back of the car, or do you think that was fuel, or what? It seems odd that they would know. I mean, because the damage presumably would have been done on full tanks early in the race, would it not?
I would have thought so, yeah, because that's when the car's going to move around the most. Yeah, so I don't know. From the footage that we saw at the time, it seemed that he had a fuel consumption issue and was in danger of not having enough fuel left in the car at the end of the race. So that explains the larger lift and coast he was doing in a number of places around the lap.
Mm-hmm.
But the strange thing was the lifting for, I think it was the last 3 laps, as you approach turn 13, which is obviously on effectively the long straight. And I can't think why you would do that. Certainly you wouldn't gain any fuel consumption benefit of it. In fact, you're using more fuel because you're slowing down and then accelerating again. So the only logical reason for doing that would be to save plank wear, potentially. But I'm impressed if McLaren have a sensor that's good enough to generate information which tells you that you're in trouble in that area. It's a difficult thing to do just because of the nature of the installation. Those skids are normally under the engine gearbox, and there's not at the front of the car. You can build a load sensor in because the front of the T-tray, although it's not as big as it used to be, there's still an amount of flex in it, and you can put some sort of load sensor in there that will work reasonably well. But at the back of the car, the packaging requirements mean that there's very little that you can do. We had a go, and to be honest, it wasn't massively successful at the time, but potentially that's improved. So maybe McLaren are ahead of the game and have something that does work well. You can do it from loads and duration of loads, effectively working out the energy that's going into the skids. But as we said already, I'd have thought that would happen early in the race. So the other thing then, the possibility is that maybe the bouncing did get worse later in the race, and maybe it was just a physical thing that Lando, in the position he was in, already having to save maybe for fuel, dropping back from the car ahead with plenty of safety margin behind him, just thought, well, I don't want to put myself through this discomfort anymore, and so decided to back off.
He looked pretty fresh when he got out of the car, didn't he?
Yeah. But it is incredibly uncomfortable, the sensation. I mean, you're literally being pounded by the track through the seat, and it is very uncomfortable. So it's not impossible that it was something to do with that, but still pretty unusual. So yeah, the whole thing is quite confusing as to, well, the getting to how they ended up with skids that are too worn is fairly straightforward, but why Lando was lifting off and the approach to turn 13 in the last few laps is very interesting, but also very difficult to sort of come to a conclusion as to what that would have been.
Yeah, with about 4 laps to go, he has a small lift, and the next lap he has a really big lift, and then he keeps that. Yeah. And then they say, but then oddly they say to him, or Will says to him, "We're kind of ahead now, so you don't have to do that as much."
Which is fuel. That's
which has got to be fuel, yeah. So they weren't really thinking about the plank at that point, quite clearly.
all that conversation does indicate that their focus was on fuel.
Yeah.
And they don't have a way of assessing skid wear during a race, which isn't entirely surprising, which just makes what Lando was doing even more surprising, because what other reason would you be doing that for?
Well, as you say, you're actually using more fuel, backing off the way he was there.
Yeah, backing off and then accelerating again. Yeah, and in terms, it's very inefficient for performance. So, yeah, it's a strange one, and it just makes me think that there was just something that he wasn't comfortable with, and he was just using up his margin for some reason. But I mean, that's a no-no, isn't it? You don't give up margins when you have them, even unnecessarily, because you don't know what's going to happen.
No,
he could run out of fuel, and if you've not kept up within a safe distance, you could fail to benefit from that, or you could have a problem when the car behind catches you. So,
yeah,
when drivers do back off seemingly for no reason whatsoever,
you get very worried,
very angry about it, to be honest. But the way he did it, which was quite a deliberate off and on the throttle, it just looks like he is doing something quite deliberate.
Yeah,
but I don't know what it was, sadly. I'm fascinated to find out.
Just to put a full stop at the end of this whole bouncing thing, do you see Qatar and Abu Dhabi being potential bounce circuits as well?
It should be less so, because what tends to happen is that bumps in the track sort of set it off. They excite the car, which then gets into the whole aero instability and causes that problem to continue. Those circuits, from memory, are a lot smoother. So I think it's less likely, but the tendency is to want to run the car stiffer when the circuit's smoother, and adding stiffness then puts you back in that territory again. So it's not impossible, but I think it's less likely to be an issue.
25 lap limit to each tire set in Qatar, set by Pirelli, because of the combination of curbs and quick corners there.
Yeah,
that's not good news for a team which has a car that's pretty good with its tire management and has a nice big aerodynamic sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
It hurts them. Whereas a car that's more aggressive with its tires, well, you could run it saying, right, well, 25 laps, here we go.
Yeah, it just equalizes the cars somewhat. I mean, the car that's easier on its tires can potentially go faster for 25 laps because the tires are going to be in better shape at the end of the 25 laps. But it does mean that the option of doing a single stop against someone else's two stop is taken away from you. So that's where it becomes disappointing, I think, from a strategy interest point of view.
Yeah, and you had that in 23, right? In Qatar, they had a limit like that.
Yes, but that was 18 laps, wasn't it? It was a tighter tolerance, and the fact is, the tires were going to fail so there was no option. But it's a bit strange. I think the first time it happened, first time we've been at that track, it's understandable that there was an issue reminiscent of Indianapolis 2005.
Yeah,
but to have it come up again 2 years later is a bit surprising. And it's not, Pirelli do have information on the car's current performance. I think they said that the information they get varies from team to team in terms of accuracy, and so they say they didn't have a great picture of what it would be, and that's their point about why they've taken this decision. Which, yeah, I can see that, but wouldn't you take the worst case? And but the thing is, the tyres have been made. The tyres were made a long time ago and shipped out. Yeah. So the fact is, they've probably realised from some later changes to cars that the load has gone up, and there just isn't time to economically make fresh tyres for this race. So that's where we are.